Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we are looking at a historical figure whose sheer force of will literally leaps off the pages of history. We're talking about a man who entirely redefined the American presidency, bringing this unprecedented level of excitement, progressive reform, and global ambition straight into the Oval Office. So let's get right to it and unpack the remarkable, action-packed life of Theodore Roosevelt.
To really wrap your head around Theodore Roosevelt, you have to understand his unmatched physical and mental toughness. I mean, picture this. The year is 1912. Roosevelt is on the campaign trail in Milwaukee, and a fanatic actually shoots him right in the chest. Now, for most people, that is absolutely the end of the line. Call the ambulance, we're done. But Roosevelt, he practically shrugs it off. He finishes his speech, soon recovers, and famously tells reporters that he feels as fit as a bull moose. It's just a wild display of resilience. But you know, it makes you wonder, where did that rugged, seemingly indestructible nature actually come from?
Section 1. The Crucible and the Strenuous Life. Now, what's really interesting here is that this legendary toughness, he wasn't born with it. Not at all. It was actually forged through profound weakness and just devastating personal tragedy. He's born in 1858 into a very wealthy New York City family, which sounds great, but he struggled terribly with severe asthma. He wasn't a rugged outdoorsman, he was a really sickly kid. Then, fast forward to 1884, an unimaginable tragedy strikes. His first wife, Alice, and his mother, Martha, both pass away on the exact same day, just 2 days after the birth of his daughter. To master this immense sorrow, Roosevelt heads west to the Dakota Badlands, and for the next 2 years, he literally lives in the saddle. He's driving cattle, hunting, even serving as a local sheriff chasing down outlaws. Through this strenuous life, he essentially heals himself. Reinvigorated, he returns east and in 1886 marries his childhood friend, Edith Caro, in London.
Section 2. The Rapid Rise to Power.
So out of that crucible, in the Badlands, a totally new man emerges, just bursting with boundless energy. And he channels all of that right into public service. The pacing of his career from this point is frantic. When the Spanish-American War breaks out, he immediately resigns as Assistant Secretary of the Navy to command the Volunteer Cavalry, the famous Rough Riders. And he isn't leading from behind a desk. He personally leads a charge right up Kettle Hill during the Battle of San Juan. That military fame skyrockets his profile, and he brilliantly leverages it to win the governorship of New York in 1898. Just 2 years after that, his momentum is so unstoppable, he joins the 1900 Republican ticket as vice president under William McKinley.
But as we know, he wouldn't stay vice president for long. Following the tragic assassination of President McKinley, Roosevelt was suddenly thrust into the highest office in the land. At just 42 years old, he became the youngest president in the nation's history.
And he brought a completely different philosophy to the Oval Office. He viewed the president as a steward of the people. What that meant to him was that he should take absolutely whatever action was necessary for the public good unless it was expressly forbidden by law or the Constitution. Basically, if it didn't explicitly say no, he took it as a yes. As he later wrote, "I did not usurp power, but I did greatly broaden the use of executive power." It was a controversial but absolutely vital shift in how the presidency operated.
Section 3. Busting Trusts at Home. And this brilliantly illustrates how he used that broadened power. Roosevelt brought his combative energy right into domestic policy. He firmly believed the government needed to stand directly in the middle of the nation's conflicting economic forces. The government had to be the great arbiter between capital on one side and labor on the other. The goal was simple to say, but incredibly tough to do: guarantee justice to each side and dispense favors to none.
To guarantee that justice, he wasn't afraid to go after the big guys. He aggressively took on massive corporations and monopolies on behalf of the public. He spectacularly emerged as a trust buster. He actually forced the dissolution of a massive railroad combination in the Northwest, and then followed that up with major antitrust suits under the Sherman Act. By stepping in to regulate these absolute economic giants, his popularity with everyday Americans just exploded.
Section 4. Carrying a big stick. Now, Roosevelt wasn't only focused on the home front. Far from it. He deliberately steered the United States onto the world stage. His entire approach to global diplomacy was defined by his absolute favorite proverb: speak softly and carry a big stick. The idea here is pretty straightforward. Be peaceful, be diplomatic, but always, always back up those words with the undeniable threat of overwhelming force.
And this philosophy quickly turned into concrete action. Roosevelt instituted what became known as the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. It's a complex policy, but essentially, it prevented the establishment of foreign bases in the Caribbean. Furthermore, it claimed the sole right of intervention in Latin America for the United States. Through this, he formally cemented American dominance in the Western Hemisphere. The international achievements under this big stick philosophy really just kept piling up. Seeing the strategic need for a shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific, he facilitated the construction of the Panama Canal. He did this by sending naval ships to support Panama's independence movement, and then boom, secured U.S. control of the canal for $10 million. Then, he literally sits down and mediates the Russo-Japanese War. For that incredible feat, he became the very first American president to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And just to make sure everyone knew the U.S. meant business, he sent the Great White Fleet all the way around the world in 1907. Just a massive, undeniable demonstration of U.S. naval muscle.
Section 5. The Crusading Conservationist.
Yet, for all his international muscle flexing, his most enduring domestic achievements probably tied directly back to the rugged outdoors. The same wilderness that had saved his life decades earlier, Roosevelt was deeply, deeply passionate about the environment. He took sweeping executive actions to protect it. He added enormously to the national forests out west. He deliberately reserved vast tracts of land entirely for public use, keeping them safe from private exploitation. If you've ever enjoyed a national forest, chances are Roosevelt had a hand in preserving it. He also fostered massive, essential irrigation projects, making sure those wild spaces would be around for generations to come.
And he pursued this and, well, pretty much everything else with a frankly exhausting level of energy. The historical sources describe him constantly crusading. He had a high-pitched voice, a jutting jaw, always pounding his fist to make a point. The strenuous life wasn't just a slogan, it was a requirement for anyone in his orbit. He romped endlessly with his 5 younger children, and this is my favorite part, he would actually lead foreign ambassadors, these very dignified formal diplomats, on these exhausting, sweaty hikes straight through Rock Creek Park in D.C. You literally had to be in shape just to have a meeting with the president.
Section 6. The Bull Moose Legacy. So what happens to a man with that much relentless energy when his time in the highest office is finally up? Well, he definitely doesn't just sit still. In 1909, he leaves the presidency and immediately goes on a massive African safari. But the pull of public service was just too strong. By 1912, he jumps right back into the arena running for president on the Progressive Party ticket, which of course became nicknamed the Bull Moose ticket thanks to his famous quote after that assassination attempt we talked about earlier. Roosevelt simply refused to quietly fade away. He stayed fully engaged right up until he passed away on January 6, 1919.
At the time of his death, a quote he had spoken years earlier still perfectly summed things up. "No man has had a happier life than I have led, a happier life in every way." Think about that journey for a second. The sickly boy who suffered from severe asthma, the young man who lost his mother and his wife on the exact same day. He embraced the strenuous life, forged himself into an unstoppable leader, and ultimately achieved incredible personal fulfillment.
And that brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Roosevelt fundamentally changed the presidency with his belief that he was a steward of the people. He believed he could do anything for the public good as long as it wasn't expressly forbidden by the Constitution. So knowing this history, how does Roosevelt's aggressive expansion of executive power shape the way we view our leaders today? Does it make us expect more bold action from them, or does it make us wary of too much concentrated power? It is a fascinating question and one I really hope you continue to explore. Keep asking great questions, and I'll catch you next time.